everybody and welcome back to the channel. So I'm running the Nomadic Waaagh once again up against the Wood Elves, 2000 points, Warhammer the Old World. I won't go through my list in too much detail because it's the same list as the last few videos, so you can go and check it out if you want to see all the magic items and stuff, and get some more pictures of the models. My odd knob has rolled up the Evil Sun Shining, the Itchy Nuisance, auto include, and the Hand of Gork, and here we go. Now normally I swap out the Hand of Gork if I roll it, because it's not as useful as the enchantments and hex spells, but in this matchup it might be quite useful to use to sort of zip my Wyvern further up the board in order to get to grips with these Wood Elves. I've also rolled up the Here We Go spell as well with the extra pip on the charge, both of which will come in handy to trying to get into combat as quickly as possible from these Wood Elves that are going to be hiding in the trees and trying to avoid combat. So let's go on to the Wood Elf list. So the Wood Elves from left to right then, there's 5 Wild Riders with Vanguard, and they've just moved up outside of the picture there. There is a lone Eagle, followed by the Glade Lord. He's mounted on a big stag with the Annoyance of Netlings, the Armour of Destiny, a giant blade and a shield, so he's rocking a 2-up, 4-up, and of course he's got the multi-wounds 2 on the blade. Then there's a unit of Way Watchers. I think there's about 9 of them. Bit further on there's a unit of Scouts. Then you've got the level 4 Spellweaver on Battle Magic. She's rolled up Fireball, Pillar of Fire, Curse of Arrow Attraction, and I think it was the Oaken Shield if I remember correctly. You've then got the Big Treeman Ancient on Elementalism, also level 4, Earthen Ramparts, the Mystical Pathways, Wind Blast, and the Summon a Wood Tree something, I forget what it's called, the one where you can summon a wood with the template. Small unit of 5 Glade Guard, another unit of Scouts, another unit of Glade Guard, another unit of Scouts, right? So you've got lots of skirmishers there. You've got the Glade Riders, sorry I forgot to say, the Glade Riders in the wood with the Spellweaver. Everything's on the Arcane Bodkins, right? So everything's minus 2 AP, which is bad news for my boar boys, and pretty defensive. Now everything's scouting, you see, so at this point here, after we've done the Scouts and Vanguard, you can see all of the units, but basically I was putting down most of my models with only a few Wood Elves that I could see, right? So normally I'm deploying last because I've got lots of units, but here basically it was just the characters, the Eagle and the Glade Guard that deployed normally, right? Everything else scouted, so the Glade Riders, the Scouts, the Way Watchers, everything else was deployed afterwards. So good strategy really to get the drop on your opponent in terms of deployment and also get the +1 for the roll-off. So you can see my funky deployment there, which was, as I said, a bit of a blind deployment because I didn't really know where the Wood Elves were going to be dropped as I was putting my units down. I've basically just put all my boar boys in a line because I don't really know where they're going to be. Pretty much anything I charge will turn to dust as long as I've got enough of my boar boys alive when I actually make contact. So I just sort of put them in a line and thought, well, look, I can just run forward as fast as I can and try and make contact with some Wood Elf units, and if I've got enough chariots coming up the flanks then hopefully I won't be too open on either side. But really just blind, not really know what I'm doing. The Wyvern is behind a bit of terrain there to give them a bit of respite on turn 1. But to be honest, with these Arcane Bodkins, it's the boar boys that are going to be most at risk. It's still strength 3 shots, there's no poison or anything, so the Wyvern with the T6 should be fairly resilient, and obviously it's fast enough to get there on turn 2. I mean, everything's fast enough to get there on turn 2, it's just that's 1 or 2 turns of shooting, and yeah, agonizingly I lose the roll-off for first turn, and the Wood Elves prepare to let loose a volley of arrows. The Wild Riders on the left charge up the board straight away into my Goblin Chariots. Now I've really fluffed up the deployment there because I've sort of put one chariot in front of the other, not sort of doing the measurements properly and realising that the Wild Riders have plenty of movement to sort of vanguard and then charge the one that is further back anyway. So I end up fleeing with both of my chariots because he goes for one, tries to redirect into the other. I flee with both of them. One of them just leaves the board immediately. The other one is on sort of the back board edge. The Wild Riders fail their charge. They sort of come forward, so perhaps I can countercharge them because I've got some Orc chariots and a pump wagon ready for that counter charge, so that's fine. And then after some sort of minor repositioning to get in range, here come the arrows, right? So they take off like 6 boar boys in a chariot, just straight away. The glowy green amulet saves me from the initial fireball from the spellweaver, but yeah, it just looks like each turn I'm going to just lose a sort of a third of that unit. So yeah, the boar boys are going to have to make into combat pretty quick if they're going to survive this. So after a painful opening turn, we march up with everything, trying to close the gap immediately as possible with these wood elves on the back of the board there. Well, I say with everything in the middle and on the right-hand side. There's kind of a little skirmish going on the left-hand side there between the chariots and the wild riders. In the middle, anyway, the boars stop short of the pillar of fire that was thrown out by the spellweaver on the first turn. And at this point, I hadn't realised I sort of made a catastrophic error, as my mage, who is normally safe behind the boar boys, and of course is safe from all of the arrow fire, but isn't safe from a vortex. And it was only after the turn was done that I realised, oh crap, that vortex is going to pass over my boars and move over my odd knob. Okay, he's toughness 4, 3 wounds, but he's got no save, and so he's at a serious risk there of dying from that vortex. I did flirt with the idea initially of putting him in the unit, but then decided against it purely on the fact that I hadn't thought about it enough, and I thought, let's just use my normal strategy and see how I go. But yeah, he should have been within the unit for his own safety. So the boar chariots on the left here, they don't charge the wild riders in the end. It's funny, we've kind of played this wrong because I assumed that they'd be able to countercharge, and therefore they'd be within 3 inches, and therefore I wouldn't get my impact hits. And we're sort of debating, oh, it's funny, isn't it, how the countercharge happens before the charge in the game, whereas in real life it's the charge that happens and the countercharge happens afterwards. But in actual fact, because they're within the movement value of the chariots, they wouldn't have been able to countercharge anyway. So anyway, we sort of played that wrong, but it's fine because I didn't charge. I charged with the pump wagon instead. Now the pump wagon, of course, moves in the compulsory phase, and therefore the there's no charge reactions to be had. I mean, they're frenzied anyway, but anyway, they can't make a reaction, and the pump wagon's charging them in the flank. Unfortunately, I don't bring down that wild rider with the impact hit, and he ends up striking back and taking 2 wounds off the pump wagon. The Snotlings manage to drag the elf down, but we end up losing combat because of the standard bearer in the unit and the elves pursue. It's fine because they've been brought out of position there, and I can charge them next turn with the chariots. But yeah, it was just a bit of confusion in that corner. So Wood Elves turn 2, and the pillar of fire moves through my boars again, kills my shaman this time. Yeah, just a big error, just putting him near that vortex. I should have just avoided that vortex like the plague as soon as I saw it. But I guess in the back of my mind, assumed, okay, he's safe behind those boar boys. Don't have to worry about the shooting phase at all. The wild riders have to charge the pump wagon, which is fleeing. Funny how the pump wagons are not unbreakable. Snotlings are unbreakable, but the pump wagons can flee, which is a bit annoying. But that's fine because the wild riders are just sort of sitting there now, and I should be able to get rid of them next turn with the chariots. The Glade Lord is sort of threatening on that side, but not doing a lot at this point. He's kind of got this 360 charge arc, and so he's skulking around that left-hand side, waiting to see if anything can move up. And that's been good play from Scott because he's managed to deny that whole left side of the board for me. And okay, I'm moving up with everything in the middle and on the right-hand side, but there's a few chariots now which just are not really in the fight because the rest of the Wood Elf army is on the back of the board, and they're not going to make it down there now. There's an eagle sitting there as well, just waiting. Another hail of arrows comes over. The Wyvern loses a couple of wounds. I managed to dispel the curse of arrow attraction, but yeah, the Wyvern is just by sheer numbers of shots, right? He's lost a couple of wounds. I lose another goblin chariot as well, so I'm losing like a chariot a turn as well, and a bunch of boar boys. The Glade Riders fire and then retreat behind the wood with their reserve move. Clever move because obviously you can't see through the wood. You can see into it, but you can't see through it, and so they fire and then they're out of sight. Yeah, so just the boar boy unit's already looking really slim. You know, it's that pillar of fire as well, which is also AP -2, and all the bow shots are AP -2, AP -3. So it's just really devastating for the boar boys. The treeman sees the wyvern bearing down on it and casts the earthen ramparts. He then moves forward. I thought, why is he moving forward? Because he's unlikely to win that fight with the wyvern with the ogre blade, but I guess the intention there was to teleport with the mystical pathways out of arc of sight of the wyvern. But he miscasts when he rolls that spell, and instead it's just a sitting duck for Orcs turn 2. So it's Orcs turn 2, and I get the triple charge into the treeman. So you've got the warboss on wyvern, got the boar boys on the left side, and we've got my frenzied orc chariot on the right side. Now, that is plenty of attacks coming in to bring down that treeman, but of course it's a character and he calls out a challenge. So I accept with the warboss on the wyvern, and it's a bit of a pillar fight. I think there's a couple wounds on each side. It's a big combat res win on my side, but of course the treeman's stubborn, so he just falls back 3 inches and we follow up. Meanwhile, on the left-hand side, the Orc chariots have charged into those wild riders and just crushed them. So finally I'm getting to grips with these Wood Elves, but just don't really have that many models left, and it's looking like while I can sort of get a few points here and there, I'm going to be whittled down next turn. Elves turn 3. So the first couple of turns took a while to get through, and now the game sort of starts to speed up a bit. The Glade Lord charges my chariot and I flee. He doesn't make it in the end, so he just sort of charges up that corner of the board there, and there's sort of a little skirmish going on now between my 2 Orc chariots and the Lord on Stag. There's then a kind of mass exodus of elves from the centre of the board to the back left side now. So you've got that the Spell Weaver and the Glade Riders, the Way Watchers, the Eagle, all just getting out of dodge really, because I think Scott's just sort of figured out that even though there's plenty of elves there, the Orcs are going to be stronger in combat if they charge in. There's not many unengaged units left though for them to shoot at, so there's not many targets for them to pick. The remaining pump wagon on the right hand side actually survives a hail of arrows. Everything else is in combat. Yeah, so we play it wrong in the combat phase. So I decline the challenge, and the warboss sort of retires from the fight and doesn't fight. And obviously in reality the warboss on wyvern can't decline the challenge because it's actually just a unit on his own. I guess because I've got all my orcs in a line there, I'm kind of thinking of it in my head as one big unit, but of course it's not. But it suited both of us at the time, to be honest, because he didn't want my ogre blade swinging into his treeman, and I wanted to get my impact hits from the chariot and my other warboss, right? So anyway, we managed to get enough wounds in that. 2 warbosses in the fight. It doesn't really matter which warboss is attacking. I've still got plenty of attacks coming in, and the treeman falls, and with a mighty crash as the tree hits the ground. Unfortunately, it doesn't fall on my orcs. So it's Orcs turn 3, and it's time to just try and get as many units into combat so I can stop them from being shot to bits in the next elf turn, or at least out of sight, out of range of the bow shots, right? So I did consider, after the treeman died, just reforming my boars into a marching column and just getting out of dodge, hiding behind that hill over there, which in a competitive scenario, at a tournament, is probably what I would have done. Because although those orcs might be able to chase down a unit of Glade Guard or 2, the points giveaway from those last 3 orcs dying is far higher, right? So, and then of course the characters are a bit isolated once the unit is split up. So, what I would have done in a tournament is just hidden the rest of that unit, because there isn't that much more they can do in this game. But it's only the 3rd turn. And so, that would have been a bit boring in the game we're playing. So I decided to just go for it and charge the unit of Glade Guard or Scouts or wherever they are in front of me. As with the other units, everybody charges, right? The Wyvern and the Pump Wagon make it into combat. The Orc Chariot and the Boar Boys don't, which is sad, because that's probably the end of the Boar Boys now, with all those -2 AP shots coming in. And the Pump Wagon, though, it's a rare time that the Pump Wagon has really sort of got its points worth, right? Because it really comes in handy here. Because it charges, obviously, in the compulsory phase, the elves can't stand and shoot against it, and it's able just to get into combat and then allow my wyvern to overrun into that other unit of elves and get a cascading combat, so I can take out 2 units of elves in one turn. Elves turn 4 then, so already there's not many units left on the board. The Glade Lord charges off that Orc chariot, who did rally last turn, I forgot to mention, but has now died to the Glade Lord's charge. The Glade Guard in the corner, the last remaining unit in that corner, charged the pump wagon and seared off the board there, and also overrun off the board as well. So those Glade Guard have survived this turn at least. And then the other bow shots all coming in from the Glade Riders and the Deadly Way Watchers just take out the rest of my Boar Boy unit, and it's just the War Boss and BSB remaining now as single characters. So that leaves me with a decision to make in the last turns of, do I hide those characters or do I try and get to grips with some elves? So it's Orcs turn 4 now, and turns 5 and 6. I think I'll just summarise the remaining turns in one go. So again, hiding my characters is probably the more prudent way of finishing out this game, but the threat of the bows is so great, I might not be able to get hidden in one turn, and then they might just sort of cut me down anyway. So I thought, let's just charge forward, and yes, we're going into short range of these bows, but let's just see if we can kill some more elves in the last few turns of the game. So I kind of just charge forward with everything, really. The War Boss takes a couple of wounds on the way in and ends up in a challenge with the Glade Lord and dies tragically to the obviously higher initiative of the Glade Lord before he gets to attack. The BSB shrugs off lots of bow shots and magic missiles and ends up making it into combat on turn 6 with the Way Watchers. Can't break them, unfortunately, because obviously he doesn't have a big enough unit strength to force them to break, but he kills a few of them and gets them to fall back. I finish off the last Glade Guard in the corner there with my remaining chariot, who hasn't lost his frenzy yet. And that's kind of how things end. Lots of the elves are hiding in that back left corner there. I'm never going to catch those Glade Riders because they're too fast and they've got a reserve move. And so the Glade Lord and the Spell Weaver and the Way Watchers survive. So in the final analysis, it kind of looked a bit closer than it was, because obviously I still had my Wyvern, I still had a couple of chariots and my BSB, but I guess the Lord and the Spell Weaver on the woody side and the Way Watchers are quite a few points. So it ends up a Wood Elf win, kind of like a 14-6 or something. Could have hidden my Boar Boys much earlier, of course, but to be honest, the Elves still had 3 more turns at that point, and so the Glade Lord would have perhaps tried to hunt them down on my side of the board, which might have been quite fun to see, and perhaps it was possible to get my War Bosses to team up on that Glade Lord and perhaps have a more meaningful combat with the Lords, but it went the way it went, obviously. I missed my Odd Knob quite badly in the latter turns. Massive mistake getting him near to that vortex. Not so much the enchantments and hexes, but obviously the ability to increase the charge range with the Here We Go, and use the Hand of Gorg to pick up the Wyvern. I could have put the Wyvern much closer to those Glade Riders and Way Watchers and made some impact on the final turns of the game. Scott did well with the Wild Riders, vanguarding and charging down that left flank or his right flank. And the Lord, to a certain extent, on that flank as well, because it's a defensive army, but then he's got a couple of very fast offensive units there, which can, stop my strategy from being kind of simple strategy. If I've just got lots of archers facing me, I can just zip forward with all of my chariots and Boar Boys. And yes, a lot of it will get shot, but a lot of it will make it in. And then it shouldn't be too much difficult to kill everything once I'm there. But if you've got some sort of tough units with lots of attacks as well, fast units like this Lord on Stag and like the Wild Riders, then you can stop me from coming up one of the flanks. And then his army have got an escape route. They've got a corner of the board there which they can kind of flee to when I get too close. And if they've just been totally defensive, then I'll be able to overwhelm them. Not sure how I could have kept my ball boys alive in this matchup. They rely on their 3-up save against archery, and with all the AP -2 and -3, the Wood Elves they had the correct arrows basically. They had Bane tips, obviously better for the monsters and my Wyvern, but the Bodkins definitely the ones for taking out cavalry. Perhaps deploying the ball boys on a flank with the chariots in the centre maybe, or even screening the ball boys with some goblin chariots for cover. But then again, in this kind of scenario, you want to deploy as wide as possible because you don't know where the woodies are going to get dropped. And if everyone's scouting, if you're too much on one side, they all scout to the opposite side and you're still far away from them. So really, you've got to spread out. But yeah, so that's it really. It's a strong deployment phase from the Wood Elves. I always say, Warhammer Fantasy Battles, games are won in the deployment and movement phases. The movement phase is the most important, and obviously the deployment phase underpins that as well. I hate skirmishers, sort of generally. I don't take them myself anymore. I took them initially to sort of try them out, but I'm just against taking them now because they just look crap. I mean, I'm being a bit blunt when I say that, but they just look like a mess of models that's indistinguishable from someone's dead pile. When your models are dying, you kind of put them in the corner of the board, and when you see a unit of skirmishers, you're thinking, is that a unit that's in play, or is it just your dead pile? And how the models look is so important to me when I play Warhammer that I just obviously if someone takes skirmishers, it is what it is. I'm not sort of having a go at my opponent, but it's just. And I remember saying to Scott at some point, "Are you sure those Glade Riders can see through the other Glade Riders there? Because aren't they blocking each other's line of sight?" And he kind of said to me, "Well, yeah, but you can place them in a way where they can see through the gaps." And then I thought to myself, yeah, you know what? It's not really worth being a dick and saying to your opponent, "Oh, you have to place each individual model in a way so that it can see through the other models," because you think, well, you can. It is possible to do that. So I guess if I was using skirmishes, I would just say to my opponent, look, to save time here, to save me getting out a measuring stick or a laser pen and trying to check all the line of sight of every little model, can we just assume that I've put them in a way so they can see past each other? Because at the end of the day, it's like you're playing AOS, isn't it? All these little individual models. I like having a unit that's on a movement tray and looks ranked up. I remember in 8th edition, I'm rambling now, I apologise, but they had the skirmishers were ranked up. They had gaps in between them, but they had a flank and they had a rear, and they were all facing the same direction. And they looked cool, whereas now they just look like a bit of a mess. Anyway, great game in terms of the practice against elves. My first time playing Wood Elves. The Wood Elves are very handy. They've got great range of tools for whoever they're up against. And if I was playing this game again, there isn't really a lot I would do differently. Obviously, putting the shaman inside the unit for his own protection, or just staying away from that vortex, and maybe getting my deployment a bit more, getting the measuring tape out a bit more clinical with those wild riders. Because obviously, when they vanguard and charge up, you've got to be ready for how you're going to tackle that. But yeah, thanks again, guys. Once again, obviously, if you made it this far, give me a like and subscribe, and leave me a comment. Let me know what you think. See you soon, people. Goodbye.